Matthew's voice echoed through the living room, drawing laughter from our gathered friends. "Oh, honey, you should see your face when you try to tell a story," he teased, his words met with knowing chuckles. "She never gets to the point, just rambles on and on. It's like watching someone try to parallel park blindfolded." A familiar wave of embarrassment swept over me as my cheeks burned. I tightened my grip around my wineglass, my well-rehearsed smile barely holding its place, the same smile I had worn throughout the 5 years of our marriage. But inside, something shifted. My name is Tasha Reynolds, and at 32, I have finally had enough of being the punchline in every one of my husband's jokes. By day, I am a marketing executive at one of Houston's top firms, leading a team of 15 and handling million-dollar campaigns with confidence. Yet, at home, I am nothing more than Matthew's favorite source of entertainment, the subject of his relentless jabs, whether it's about my cooking, my habits, or even my appearance. Tonight was meant to be a casual dinner with friends, but as always, it had turned into the Matthew Show. He was at his best, or rather, his worst, commanding the room with exaggerated stories designed to make me look ridiculous. I had barely begun to share news of my recent promotion when he cut me off with a smirk. "She probably slept through the meeting where they announced it," he quipped, "since she can sleep through an earthquake." Another burst of laughter, more amused glances in my direction. Then, as if his words weren't enough, he draped an arm over my shoulders in that familiar, possessive way. "No, but really," he continued, "you should see her try to give presentations at work. Remember that time you called me in tears because you forgot the client's name? That never happened." But Matthew had a way of crafting fiction that felt just real enough, blending half-truths with complete fabrications until even I started to second-guess my own memories. And each time I tried to defend myself, his response was always the same, that condescending smirk, followed by a casual, "Relax, it's just a joke." As I watched him now, confidently performing for his audience, I realized something had changed. He still believed he held all the power, but what he didn't know was that I had reached my breaking point. A secret, the one he had begged me to keep, sat on the tip of my tongue, burning for release. Maybe it was time for everyone to hear a truly funny story. In the beginning, his teasing had seemed harmless. We met at a company event, where I had been representing my firm. He had been charming, confident. When I clumsily spilled my drink, he laughed in a way that felt warm rather than cruel. "You're adorable when you're flustered," he had said, helping me clean up. I had mistaken his mockery for flirtation. The shift happened gradually. A casual joke about my poor sense of direction in front of his friends. A comment about how I couldn't put together an outfit without his guidance. After each sting, he would counterbalance it with extravagant gifts and affectionate gestures, as if to erase the damage. I had always been sure of myself. My boss, Alex, frequently praised my strategic mind and strong presentation skills. But slowly, Matthew's relentless teasing began to erode that confidence. His words followed me into meetings, his voice in my head making me question my own abilities. Even our wedding should have been a warning. During his speech, he had the entire room laughing at anecdotes about my clumsiness and forgetfulness. I remember my father shifting uncomfortably in his seat while the rest of our guests roared with laughter. I had convinced myself that this was just Matthew's way of showing affection, through humor. Then, about 2 years ago, things took another turn. At first, he blamed his growing distance on work stress, then on my so-called neediness. When we finally saw a doctor, the truth came out, his struggles were medical. After that, something in him hardened. His jokes became sharper, crueler. It was as if the only way he could cope was by cutting me down, using my humiliation as his source of power. "Don't tell anyone," he had pleaded the night we found out. "This stays between us." I had agreed, thinking I was doing what a supportive wife should. Even as his public ridicule of me worsened, I kept his secret. That's what love is, isn't it? Then last week, I overheard a phone call that shattered the last of my patience. He was speaking to his friend Brad, twisting our private struggles into another punchline. He joked about how I was frigid and impossible to please, rewriting the truth to make himself look like the victim. For 5 years, I had swallowed my pride, forcing laughter while suffocating inside. 5 years of allowing myself to shrink so I wouldn't become the target of his next joke. 5 years of protecting his secrets while he freely exposed every one of my so-called flaws. Now, as I looked around the room at our friends, the same ones who had laughed at his jokes for years, I wondered, would they still find him so amusing if they knew the truth? And here's the best part, Matthew continued, his voice full of theatrical excitement. Last week, Tasha actually tried to cook a romantic dinner. You should have seen it, burnt to a crisp, smoke everywhere. She can't even boil water without having a crisis. The laughter around me felt sharp, like tiny needles pricking my skin. The truth was, I had spent hours preparing that dinner, carefully crafting a space where we could finally have an honest conversation about our problems. The smoke? That had only happened because I got distracted by a call, another one from Matthew, telling me he'd be late. Again. Brad's wife, Jennifer, leaned in slightly, swirling the wine in her glass before turning to Matthew with a teasing smirk. At least she makes an effort, Matt. When's the last time you actually cooked anything? For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of gratitude toward her, but it was quickly extinguished by Matthew's response. He grinned, tilting his head in my direction. Oh, I make sure she's satisfied in other ways, he said smoothly, his voice laced with innuendo. Right, honey. Laughter rippled through the room, the kind that was more suggestive than lighthearted. My face grew hot as I watched Matthew bask in their amusement. He knew exactly what he was doing, deflecting attention from his own shortcomings by weaving a convenient illusion. Actually, I began, trying to steer the conversation back to reality. Matthew didn't let me. Careful now, sweetheart, he cut in, his voice casual, almost playful, but his eyes telling another story. We wouldn't want you embarrassing yourself again. Remember last month at the Stevens party? That little mix-up when you tried to tell that story about your client meeting. I stiffened. That wasn't. See what I mean? Matthew interrupted, turning to our friends with an exaggerated sigh. She gets so mixed up sometimes. Good thing she has me to keep her on track. Brad chuckled, and a few others joined in, but Jennifer's expression had shifted. She was watching me now, her amusement replaced with something closer to concern. The walls felt like they were closing in, the weight of years of subtle humiliation pressing in on me. And then Matthew went for the final blow. You know what's funny? He was in his element now, feeding off their attention. Tasha actually suggested we start trying for kids soon. Can you imagine? She can barely take care of herself. A heavy silence fell over the room. Everyone knew. We had been married for 5 years and remained childless. A few exchanged awkward glances, sensing the sudden change in atmosphere. Matthew, oblivious to the discomfort, continued, his laughter forced but persistent. I mean, let's be honest. Some people just aren't meant to be parents. Right, honey? Something inside me shifted at that moment. For years, I had kept his secret, out of love, out of loyalty, out of a misguided sense of duty. I had endured the jokes, the condescension, the way he chipped away at my confidence, all while playing the role of the doting wife. But this? Using our personal struggles as a punchline to elevate himself? That was the last straw. I set my wine glass down with deliberate care, my hands steady for the first time all evening. If Matthew wanted tonight to be a spectacle, I was about to give him one. Matthew, I said, my voice calm and unwavering, maybe you should tell them about your doctor's appointment last year. The smirk froze on his face. Honey, you've had a bit too much to drink. Maybe some water would help, he deflected quickly. I met his gaze steadily. I'm not drunk. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen things more clearly than I do right now. I turned toward the others. Would you all like to hear a truly funny story for once? Matthew stood abruptly, his movements stiff. Who needs a refill? He asked, his voice laced with nervous energy. Brad? Jennifer? Sit down, Matthew, I said evenly. You always love a good story, don't you? A tension settled over the room. The shift in power was palpable, and our friends could sense it. Jennifer set her wine glass down carefully, her gaze flicking between us. Matthew's usual smirk was gone, replaced by something darker. Tasha's had too much wine, he insisted, his tone growing sharper. She gets emotional when she drinks. Remember that time at the Christmas party when I what? I cut in. When I caught you making up stories about our marriage to impress your friends. Or when I overheard you blaming me for something that isn't my fault. Jennifer's eyes widened slightly. Matt, she said softly, maybe you should let her speak. Matthew let out a laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. There's nothing to say. Tasha's just being dramatic. You know how women can be sometimes. Am I dramatic when you belittle my cooking? My voice was stronger now, rising with each word. Or when you dismiss my career. When you make comments about how I look. Or, I took a step forward, my heart pounding. Am I being dramatic about the real reason we don't have children? Matthew's face lost its color. He reached for my arm, his grip gentle but firm. Honey, let's talk about this in private. For a brief second, I wavered. The old habit of shielding him, protecting his secrets, clawed at me. He must have sensed it, because his expression softened, his voice lowering into something warm, familiar. I'm sorry if I went too far, he murmured. You know I love you. Let's just enjoy the rest of the evening, okay? Brad nodded, eager to smooth things over. Come on, Tasha. Matt's just joking around. He didn't mean anything by it. For a moment, I almost believed them. Almost let myself fall back into the comfortable rhythm of smiling, nodding, pretending. Then I felt Matthew's hand on my shoulder, the slight squeeze that carried more weight than words. A silent warning, disguised as reassurance. Remember what we talked about, he whispered, just loud enough for only me to hear. Some things should stay private. And that's when I saw it for what it truly was. The manipulation beneath the concern. The quiet threat wrapped in affection. For years, my silence had been his shield. My discretion had been his weapon. You're right, Matthew, I said, rising to my feet. Some things should stay private. Like your little jokes about our marriage. Especially since. I locked eyes with him, my next words poised on my lips. When was the last time we truly had one? I asked, my voice laced with something more than frustration. Tasha, Matthew growled in warning. Don't. What's the matter? I thought you loved jokes. I turned toward our friends, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Want to hear something really amusing? For the past 2 years, my husband has been. Before I could finish, Matthew lunged forward, his sudden movement sending his wine glass tumbling over. This isn't funny anymore, he snapped. No, I agreed, stepping back slightly. It never was. Just as the tension thickened, Jennifer's voice suddenly cut through the silence, shaky but resolute. Well, since we're all in the mood for sharing funny stories, maybe we should talk about what you told Brad last week, Matt. Matthew's head jerked in her direction. What? Jennifer's gaze didn't waver. About how Tasha is frigid. How she's the reason you. Her voice faltered, but the implication was clear. The room fell into a suffocating silence. I turned my attention to Jennifer, then to Brad, who suddenly found his shoes very interesting. You've been telling people that it's my fault? My voice came out barely above a whisper. Honey, they're twisting my words, Matthew stammered, his confidence wavering. I was just venting to Brad. You know, guy talk. Jennifer's expression darkened. Guy talk. Her voice rose in disbelief. You've been telling everyone at the club that your wife is broken? That she's the reason you can't. She stopped herself, her disgust evident. Enough. Matthew's sudden outburst made everyone flinch. You have no idea what you're talking about. But Jennifer wasn't finished. I heard you at Susan's party too, she said coldly. Making jokes about how Tasha probably couldn't satisfy any man. That she's lucky to have you because no one else would want. That's enough. Matthew roared, his face a deep shade of purple. My hands trembled, but it wasn't fear coursing through me. For so long, I had kept his secret out of loyalty, while he had been dismantling my dignity, making me the punchline of jokes not just in our home, but everywhere. Actually, I said, my voice slicing through the air with finality, it's not enough. Not even close. I turned to our friends, my gaze sweeping over them. Do you all want to know why we really don't have children? Why Matthew makes jokes about our personal life but never actually discusses it? Why he's so desperate to make me look inadequate? Tasha, please, Matthew's voice cracked, his usual arrogance beginning to crumble. Think about what you're doing. I have thought about it, I said, unwavering. For 2 years, I've thought about it. Every single time you humiliated me in public. Every time you made me feel small. Every time you shifted the blame for our problems onto me, I thought about it. I glanced around the room at the people who had laughed at his cruel jokes for years. My husband has been dealing with complete erectile dysfunction for the past 2 years, I said, my voice steady. That's why we don't have children. That's why he fabricates stories about me being inadequate. That's why he needs to tear me down in front of others, because it's easier than facing the truth. The silence that followed was absolute. Matthew stood motionless, his complexion drained of color. The doctor said it was likely psychological, I continued. Suggested therapy. But Matthew refused. Said he didn't need help. Instead, he chose to handle it by making me the joke. Matthew's voice dropped to a whisper, barely holding together. You promised, he said, his expression raw with betrayal. You swore you'd never tell. And you promised to love and respect me, I replied without hesitation. I guess we've both fallen short. Brad shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. Jennifer's expression was one of pure disgust as she stared at Matthew. Around the room, our friends fidgeted, their gazes darting anywhere but at the man who had spent years controlling the narrative. For the first time in our marriage, Matthew had nothing to say. No sharp comeback, no cruel joke to steer attention away. He was exposed, just as he had exposed me for years. The balance had finally shifted. In revealing his truth, I had freed myself from its weight. Now, everyone understood what fueled his cruel humor, the insecurity, the fear, the need to degrade me to shield himself. You've ruined everything, Matthew finally hissed, his voice low and dangerous. Do you think this is funny? Do you think humiliating me makes you better? No, Matthew, I answered calmly. I don't think humiliation is funny at all. That's the difference between us. He turned desperately to our friends, scrambling for any chance to salvage his image. She's lying. She's only saying this to humiliate me because she's jealous of my success. You all know how she gets. Stop. Brad's voice was firm, cutting through Matthew's excuses. Just stop, Matt. We've all seen how you treat her. Oh, so now you're on her side? Matthew laughed bitterly, but the sound was hollow. After all the times you laughed at my jokes? After everything I confided in you about her? That's exactly why, Jennifer interjected, her voice resolute. The things you've said about Tasha, they were cruel. We should have spoken up sooner. Matthew's face twisted in fury. You want cruel? He turned to me, his mask slipping completely. Fine. His gaze burned into mine as he smirked. Why don't you tell them about that big promotion you're so proud of? Tell them how you really got it. My breath caught in my throat. This was new territory, an area his taunts had never touched before. My career. Tell them about those late nights with your boss, he continued, his voice dripping with venom. Tell them why you were chosen over more qualified candidates. The air in the room shifted. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was a deliberate, calculated attack. Actually, a new voice spoke from the doorway, strong and clear. I can tell them about that promotion. Every head turned as Alex, my boss, stood there. I had completely forgotten that she was supposed to stop by later with some contracts. I've been standing here for quite some time, Alex said as she stepped further into the room. Long enough to hear you trying to ruin your wife's reputation just to protect yourself. Matthew's face turned ghostly pale. This is a private matter, he insisted. Nothing is private with you, Matthew. Isn't that your thing? Making sure everything is out in the open. Alex turned toward the others in the room before continuing. For the record, Tasha earned that promotion because she secured the Peterson account on her own. She stayed late perfecting the pitch, yes, but she wasn't alone. Our entire team was there. I know because I was right there with her, night after night. Alex, you don't have to do this, I started, but she cut me off immediately. Yes, I do, she said firmly. I've watched you shrink yourself for years because of him. That ends today. She turned back to Matthew, meeting his gaze without hesitation. Your wife is exceptional at what she does. She's worked hard for every achievement. If anyone in this marriage is riding someone else's coattails, it's you. Matthew's eyes darted around the room, searching for even a shred of support. But the silence that met him made it clear there was none. His expression twisted into something dark. "You really think this makes you strong?" He sneered at me. "Turning my friends against me? Sharing private medical details? You're pathetic." I rose to my feet, calmly gathering my purse. "No, Matthew. What's truly pathetic is tearing others down just to feel bigger. It's blaming your wife for your own shortcomings. It's mistaking cruelty for power." I turned to the guests. "Thank you all for coming. I believe the party is over." As people started gathering their things, Matthew made one last desperate attempt. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." I paused at the stairs, looking at him one last time. "That's the first genuinely funny thing you've said all night," I said, my voice steady. "Because trust me, Matthew, I won't." Word spread quickly. Within a week, everyone in our social circle knew about Matthew's behavior, not just the medical issue he was so ashamed of, but also the years of cruelty he had inflicted on me. The charming, funny persona he had carefully cultivated over the years crumbled as people began to share their own experiences, stories of his bullying, his manipulative jokes, his need to always be the center of attention at someone else's expense. At the country club, where he once loved holding court with his sharp humor, people started avoiding his table. His jokes, once met with laughter, were now met with awkward silence. Even his closest friends began pulling away, especially after Jennifer opened up about the vicious lies he had spread. The final humiliation came at his firm's annual dinner. As usual, he tried to tell one of his amusing stories about me, forgetting that I was no longer there to play the role of his punchline. But this time, someone in the crowd interrupted him. "Is this going to be as accurate as your other stories, Matt?" Laughter rippled through the room, not at his joke, but at him. Humiliated, he stormed out. Later, I heard he had drowned his frustration in alcohol at a bar, ranting to anyone who would listen about how I had ruined his life by exposing him. But here's the thing about confidence: it doesn't come from tearing others down. I had to lose my marriage to find mine. And as I packed my belongings and moved into my new apartment, I felt something I hadn't in years: relief. For the first time in a long while, I could finally breathe again. The last time I saw Matthew, he attempted another one of his usual jokes as I carried boxes out of our former home. But this time, no one laughed. Because, as it turns out, cruelty isn't so amusing when everyone can finally see it for what it really is. 6 months later, my life looked completely different, in the best way possible. My promotion led to even bigger opportunities, and without Matthew constantly belittling me, I found the confidence to take them. Alex became more than just my boss. She became a close friend, someone who lifted me up instead of tearing me down. Jennifer and I kept in touch too. A month after our dinner party, she filed for divorce from Brad, telling me that seeing me stand up for myself gave her the courage to face her own unhappy marriage. Now, we meet regularly for coffee, sharing laughter about things that are actually funny. Surprisingly, the divorce proceedings were quick and easy. Terrified of further embarrassment, Matthew agreed to my terms without argument. His final weak attempt at humor, well, at least now everyone knows why we never had kids, fell flat when my lawyer simply stared at him in silence. Last week, I ran into him at a restaurant. He was sitting alone, making weak attempts to charm the waitress with his usual quips. She wasn't laughing. As I walked by, he called out, "Still can't take a joke, Tasha?" I stopped, turned to face him, and said, "Oh, I can take a joke, Matthew. I just finally realized you were one." Then I walked away, and behind me, for the first time in our entire relationship, I heard something I never had before: silence. No retort. No smug laughter. Just the quiet acceptance of his new reality. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who is no longer the punchline of someone else's cruel jokes. I see someone who has reclaimed her voice, her strength, and her happiness. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't just exposing a bully. It's rediscovering your own joy.